Chapter 8. Departure and Horror. The winds howled across the plains surrounding Bastogne as Ruffier adjusted the straps of his leather pack, forcing himself to focus on the rhythmic crunch of his boots against the gravel path. He reached the city gates. Those gathered were anxious. The thought of going to battle unnerved the recruits, but the veterans were a bit nervous since some of them had first-hand experience against this enemy. After a series of spirited farewells to family and friends, they had all drawn together, expecting the call of their officers. "Gather around," one of the officers barked. "Get in double-column formation. We have much to discuss." With practiced efficiency, the 4 groups of scouting parties assembled, each composed of 50 souls, 40 infantry and 10 archers. Berenguer explained their mission. They would be traveling in different directions and converging near the infamous Black Chasm. "Those heading south will guard the road until our return," he informed. As the groups prepared to depart, Berenguer scanned the faces of his soldiers. He called for volunteers to scout ahead. Walter, the roguish brother of Sigrid, a silent promise flaring in his hazel eyes, volunteered alongside another, eager to prove his mettle. "Be careful and bring back some rabbits," Sigrid teased, her tone rich with playful mockery, punctuated with a cheeky tongue stuck out at her brother. He winked in response, vowing not to let her starve. A few recruits inquired about the nature of the beastmen, their fears weaving questions in the twilight. "You'll know them when you see them," a grizzled veteran grunted, shrugging off their queries with an indifferent gaze. Beside him, Rainier, a steady-handed recruit whose thoughts often wandered to the darker tales, warned, "They serve the dark powers. They take all the women they see." His words sparked a ripple of disbelief and confusion among the younger soldiers, each of them wondering what monsters lay in wait beyond. As night cloaked the land, Berenguer led his group to a defensible hilltop, declaring it their campsite for the night. "Place a watch on the surrounding area," he instructed with authority. Soon, the whispers of the forest enveloped them as darkness settled like a heavy blanket. Faint stars blinked above, distant yet comforting in their quiet brilliance. Walter eventually returned to camp, his brow lined with worry. When he sought out Berenguer in his tent, he found only an unwelcoming void and a troubled silence. "Where's the other scout?" Berenguer inquired, his tone clipped. Walter shrugged, a knot forming in his stomach. They had parted amicably along the dirt road, and now the echo of his absent companion hung heavy in the air. Ruffier, standing just outside the tent, peered into the horizon, the anxiety in his chest beginning to swell. Goderoy approached him, sensing the tension that threaded through the camp. "Time for dinner," he said, with a forced cheerfulness meant to uplift spirits. They made their way toward the cauldron simmering with aromatic stew, drawn by the warm scents wafting through the cooling evening. Gathered around the cauldron, laughter and chatter blended with the crackling of the fire. Sigrid stirred the pot, her hands deftly mixing herbs, while Walter conversed with Rainier, who polished his blade, their voices merging with the scent of earth and iron. But soon, Walter's jovial tone shifted the mood. He stated quietly that their second scout was missing. "What?" Rainier's voice rang with alarm, cutting through like a knife drawn from its sheath. But before panic could blossom among them, Goderoy clamped a hand on Rainier's shoulder, whispering, "Don't create panic. That's not good for morale." Walter nodded slowly, his expression darkening. "The route we're taking tomorrow is the same as the missing scout. If there's any chance to discover what happened, we should find out." That night, the group settled with unease draped over their shoulders. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced erratically against the surrounding darkness, much like their whispered fears. Unbeknownst to them, hidden among the swirling doubts and creeping shadows, the malevolent eyes of the beastmen watched with hungry intent from the fringes of the forest. As dawn spilled its pale light across the jagged horizon, casting elongated shadows upon the encampment nestled in the hilltop, Berenguer ordered the dismantling of the camp. After traveling for several hours, Walter strayed from the line, his instincts prickling at something amiss. His keen eyes caught shadows of movement on the ground, large, uneven tracks that had a grotesque familiarity. He squatted close, examining the disturbed earth and the odd markings, catching sight of something trailing behind the prints. With a mix of urgency and dread, he turned towards Berenguer, shouting above the rustle of leaves and swollen silence of the woods, "Sir, I found some unusual tracks." Berenguer's face hardened, his jaw setting. Weapons at the ready, form tight, he barked, his voice cutting through the atmosphere like steel through fog. The formations shimmered with tension as they adjusted, eyes darting, senses alert. They moved forward, Walter leading the way, his heart pounding in sync with the hurried footsteps of his companions. Hope wavered with every step until, at last, they came to a clearing that snatched the breath from their lungs, each of them frozen, both horror and disbelief striking them like a sudden storm. Before them stood the head of the missing scout on a rusted pike, his eyes frozen wide in terror, a silent scream that reverberated through the minds of the men. The rest of him was a scattered constellation of bones, flesh long devoured, evidence of something nightmarish prowling these woods. The sight was more than just a loss of life. It was a profound violation, a warning carved into the world with the strength of cruel desolation. Some recruits buckled, fighting back the rise of bile, turning away as others held themselves steadfast. What in the lady's name could do this? One whispered, eyes glassy with fear. Walter's gaze was drawn deeper into the clearing, where another, darker trail stretched out before them. Thick hoofprints littered the ground, dozens, if not hundreds, marking a path leading towards the black chasm. The grim realization settled heavily in the pit of their stomachs. Berenguer inhaled deeply, steeling himself against the rising tide of panic. We cannot linger here. We continue on the same route, but double the speed, he commanded, urgency sharpening his tone. Our brothers may be facing the enemy soon, or Lady forbid, it may be already too late. They resumed their march, heightened adrenaline fueling their pace. As they neared the remnants of the campsite, dread seeped into their hearts. An abyss of silence welcomed them when they arrived. The camp was ransacked, smoldering remnants of an onslaught and flight lying in the ash-strewn earth. The fight was mostly one-sided. 5 men check for survivors, Berenguer ordered, his tone firm despite the chill creeping into his voice. The rest of us form a protective circle around the perimeter. Moments stretched into eternity as the 5 ventured into the remnants. Tension knotted in their gut as they awaited the inevitable sound of discovery. And then, a shout ricocheted through the mist, bringing urgency with a mingling sense of dread. In a heartbeat, they returned, bearing the weight of a dying soul draped around their shoulders, his breath a mere whisper, fading with life. "Trap," he gasped, his eyes wide and glimmering with the ethereal sheen of otherworldly fear. In that moment, the air shimmered, heavy and oppressive, and a distant thundering emerged, sounds of hooves drumming like ominous war drums, accompanied by chanting that gurgled from the throat of the forest itself. Berenguer could see the rising tide of beastmen across the field, their twisted forms shifting like shadows of dread. A shiver ran down his spine, the kind that heralded a storm of violence. He had faced many foes before, but the beastmen were anathema, bristling with unbridled savagery. They came like a tide of chaos, horns gleaming in the morning light, eyes burning with a feral hunger. The air filled with the electrifying scent of impending battle. "Men of Bretonnia, on me!" he bellowed, voice a granite roar against the cacophony of war drums and the mewling cries of his enemies. "Form a shield wall. Archers, loose arrows on my mark." Instinctively, the men rallied, fear coalescing into determination. Rufia and his friends hastened to the left of the formation, hearts thrumming in their chests. "This formation is only for the initial clash," Goderoy murmured, gripping his sword hilt tightly. "We'll probably switch formation after. We'll get surrounded," Rainier added, eyes narrowed toward the mob of beastmen that thrashed and howled like a living storm on the other end of the valley. "I don't care," Walter interjected from behind them, his voice steady. "An archer to the last. Let them come, I'll fill them with arrows." Rufia forced a grin despite the gnawing tension. "We will survive. After all, Walter is paying for the ale tonight." A soft chuckle flowed amongst them, a golden thread of humor weaving through the fabric of their fear. "Sigrid," Beregier called out, locking eyes onto the young lady standing resolute among the men. "After the initial clash, cover your brother's back. No matter what happens, stay with him." "Of course, he would be lost without me," Sigrid replied, a flicker of bravado igniting in her chest. Her brother, Walter, smirked, a glimmer of gratitude shining through the bravado. Beregier's voice pierced the rising tension as he shouted, "Archers, loose arrows." The sky darkened with feathers, arrows like rain fell with vengeance. Each arrow found its mark, inflicting as much toll on the enemy as the beastmen had been preparing to unleash upon them. The clash of steel rang out, a symphony of survival resounding through the chaos. As the beastmen surged forward, a guttural roar echoing across the field, Beregier's command boomed once again. "Charge! Avenge our brothers!" With that thunderous command, the Bretonnian men surged forward like a tide of steel, shields locked, their determination crackling in the air like the smoke of a dying fire. Thundering hooves trampled the earth as they clattered into their foes, and the world around them dissolved into a savage dance of steel, blood, and screams.